Om Sahanavadu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavaditam Astum Aviddishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May that one increase and enhance and give strength to our studies. May we work together with great vigor. May our study together make us illumined. May there be no dislike between us. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. This peace prayer is actually to be found, of course, at the commencement of the Katha Upanishad. We'll find it in other places too, but the Taittiriya Upanishad will find it. And there is a connection because the Katha Upanishad is part of the Taittiriya school of the Yajurveda. And it deals, as the name suggests, Katha, a story, with a very ancient story actually, that is first found in the Rig Veda, in the 10th section, stanza 135. And I think all of you are familiar with the story. Essentially, it is a story about faith, Shraddha. That is a very essential quality, and particularly coming from a very fresh mind. The story is centered around Nachiketa. Last week, we finished off the last final stanzas of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita after a long study. And the Katha Upanishad has many cross-references there, similar connections. We can see similar concepts, even the whole concept of the idea of our life being something like a chariot. And the horses, let's say 5 of them, let's say 10 of them, 5 organs of action, 5 organs of reaction, if you will. And so 10 organs are there, and the chariot itself is the body. And the charioteer is the intellect. The reins are the mind. And so it is only by controlling this unit that we typically call I that we are able to clear the way for a certain revelation about the truth. So I don't intend to, of course, to go through the whole of this Katha Upanishad because obviously it's a very lengthy Upanishad, not the most lengthy of all the Upanishads, but it has some important points to make. The key question is brought up really as a doubt. And in this Upanishad, there are 2 chapters, and each has 3 sections. So when we take the first chapter and the first section and the 20th stanza, there is a question that is asked, very poignant question. It is asked about a doubt. And the doubt is concerning when somebody is dead, when a man is dead. Some say he is, some say he's not. And so what's the answer? And now he's conversing with a great teacher because the teacher is Yam himself. That simultaneously represents death and control. A very subtle play on concepts because if we don't control fully, if we don't take control, let's say if we don't take control of a car, we'll wind up in the ditch. So it's a very important thing to control the car. And the way we do it is we know what the gears are, we know how fast it can go, we know when to slow, we know when to speed. And we have gotten used to having senses everywhere. And when we see the car veering off in one direction, then automatically we correct it. We don't notice even the correction. It's now settled down on something like the habit level. It's now gone into an automatic mode. Anything we repeat over and over again becomes knowledge. What is knowledge? Knowledge can be defined as the cessation of the necessity to repeat something. So you know your name, I guess you don't have to repeat it. And it doesn't diminish. You write 100 checks, you don't have to fill up with 100 names again. So this is something that is known. If you want to know, when will you get to the end of a spiritual journey or a pilgrimage? You see, that's a funny question. First of all, it tells us I'm not there. Secondly, it tells us that I have no idea. It's an automatic sense when I'm there. I know I'm there. That's the fact of it. If you're not living in Dublin and you say, when will I know I'm in Dublin? Well, you'll know when you're in Dublin for sure. Don't ask me when you will know. When you're there, you'll know. But a process has to take place. And Katha Upanishad is a very practical Upanishad, like all Upanishads. It not only sets out the principle in advance, in answer to this question, because it's a very subtle question, but lays out the step-by-step process. How will we get there? And every good teacher will know, don't give the whole thing in one go. Lead a person step by step. And even prior to this question, there have been a number of concerns. Firstly, concern for the earthly life, because 3 boons were given by Yam, having kept Nachiketa waiting for 3 days. It's only courteous to give the Brahman 3 wishes. But the first wish was, let me return back to my father, who must be worried. In other words, let me take up the physical awareness and deal with things in a compassionate and in a right way, in a dharmic way, in a harmonious way. And then the second wish, of course, was, how can I get this immortality, this thing that is beyond death, this thing called heaven? And it seems to me that people do all kinds of particular sacrifices. Tell me that particular sacrifice which will enable me to go to this realm of immortality. But immortality in a relative sense. That is that which is an interspace area, an in-between area, that which is a beyond area, but not a freedom. Understanding this, going step by step, see, then from, you can say, the physical to the mental, the more subtle. The next thing is, what about freedom? What about this other dimension? What about when the next phase comes in? Is there being? Is there non-being? Now, of course, the question is not really framed. It's not a concern that is there with atheism, because Nachiketa knows very well in previous passages that there is a transition period and that there is something like an after effect or an afterlife. There's no question about that. So it's not about that. It's more like this. If the ultimate truth is an absolute, is it like a complete self-annihilation? Is it a nothingness? Is all knowledge gone? Or is there something? You can put it in this way. Is it emptiness or is it fullness? And the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad also asks the question in a conversation between that great sage Yajnavalkya, and he is answering a question that raises this difficulty, because you say that there's no knowledge afterwards, but what he's saying really is, in this absolute state, there is no recognizable carry-on, because it is nothing like the earth. It is nothing like a conditioned something. That doesn't mean to say it's a nothing. In fact, it's the opposite. It's an everything. This is one of the great arguments with some nihilist Buddhists. The Brahma Sutras or the Vedanta Sutras, the many positions are hit left and right, the position of Sankhya's and so on. And one of the positions that is hit left and right would be anticipation of a Buddhist position that wants to be either materialist, that is reductionist, or wants to be idealist, or wants to be nihilist. And in some kind of argument or some kind of discussion, if you will, about at the end of the road, is there an emptiness called a shunya? No, there's a fullness. But what happens if you empty the ocean? Well, something will be there, sand will be there, something will always be there. That's the idea. So there are many important concepts, and the answer to this question, we bring up the passage here. So we're referring to 1:120 here. So the question is phrased like this. Yayam prete vichikitsa manusya stityeka eke nayam astiti chaike. There is this doubt. What is the doubt? In regard to a man who has departed, and some hold that he is, and some hold that he is not. And I would be instructed by thee, says Nachiketa from Yam, in this knowledge. And so that's my request. Now, of course, the answer doesn't immediately come because Yam is saying, look, even the highest deities, they really don't know this. You're very, very subtle, Are you sure you want this? Because other things are available. I can give you anything you want. But all of these things are seen to be ephemeral, temporal, and are not fully accepted by Nachiketa, not at all accepted. So because he's somebody who's exhibiting a high degree of faith, and faith means that it is the opposite to fear. Fear means faith in heredity. But real faith means, no, I have made a distinction. I can see that there is no merit in things which are fleeting. So I need some basis to move forward. I need to know what is the thing which is stable. That's really what's behind the question. Now, of course, the doubt is not really about is there an afterlife, but we find that doubt in atheists in a different sense. So atheists will say, that's it. This life is finished, and that's the end of it. There won't be anything more thereafter. Even the ancient Jewish people had that same idea, religious as they were. God will look after us in this life, but forget about the afterlife. We don't have a concept of soul or anything like that. The question doesn't even arise. But atheists will use a different thing, because matter is the only thing that exists, and so there's nothing there beyond it. When matter is gone, when this body is gone, it's gone, finished. But then we went through a meditation a short while ago, which asked a number of key questions. These are very leading questions. Am I in the eye? Am I in the ear? Like that, parts of the body were gone through section by section. And I asked, am I in this? Or do these belong to some entity, some owner, something called I? Same thing can be asked about your car. Am I the engine? Am I the pistons? Am I the windows? Am I the aluminum? Am I the wheels? Am I the tires? Am I the steering wheel? These seem to be obvious, silly questions to us because we can easily tick and say, no. Because we have the experience of going in the car and out of the car, but we have associated so much with an ownership of an I, an integral unit, just because it's a manager, a part of a mental makeup that asserts its ownership and agency and makes this confusion. And this identity is called technically avidya, ignorance. How to get out of that? Now, from that point of view, if you ask, when a person has departed, but then what departs? The senses depart, the vitality in the organs depart, the energy departs, sight departs, hearing departs, all of this departs. But the person themselves, do they exactly depart? And so that's a very interesting question, because if my nature is something different, what is described here as Atman, the self, if the internal self that never comes, that never goes, and when we've studied the Bhagavad Gita, this comes out in the second chapter already, the commencement of Sri Krishna's teaching, straight away it's told. And the same thing is told, almost word for word. You're grieving, nobody is slain. Nobody slays, nobody's slain. You think that that's the case. Now you have to get out of that way of thinking. And what are the steps to do it? So Nachiketas has no doubt about survival. That's not the key question. It's not the atheistic idea. It's because he already said, a mortal ripens like corn, and like corn is born again. He already stated it. No, his problem is about the condition of the liberated soul. Muktatma Swarupa. So the doubts about the future of the liberated being, they're not peculiar to our age. They were there in this day and age. And as I mentioned, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there's an episode, Yajnavalkya says that the liberated soul, having passed beyond, has no more separate consciousness, what is called samnya. It dissolved in the absolute consciousness. Just like a lump of salt is the example, dissolved in water. This example is given in two places. Chandogya Upanishad uses the same simile. So you take salt, you dissolve it in water. Can you find any trace? Of course, if you taste it, you'll find the whole thing is salty. And that's the point. It is a dissolution. You know, Krishna gives a great example about the salt doll who walks into the ocean, naturally loses his form completely and dissolves in the water, unable to reassemble and come back and say, hey, come on, let's all go into the ocean. Once you've gone in there, there's a dissolution. Is it being? Is it non-being? Is the question. So he justifies the absence of separate consciousness to his bewildered wife. Maitreyi is a conversation, which incidentally persuades us that any idea of that the Vedas should not be taught to women is gone, because in these ancient days, Maitreyi got the full understanding, the full knowledge. So where everything has become the one self, when and what should we see, what should we hear, what should we think? And the one who is liberated from the liberations of name and form, the one that has become one with everything, one with all, it cannot be said to exist in the ordinary sense. That is the objective sense. This is my hand, this is the table, this is the chair, this is my job. So not existing in that sense, not existing in a temporal and spatial sense. If he has attained to real being means pure being, just here. And so the question repeatedly put, say, to the Buddha was like this. Does the Tathagata, that is the one that is, able to facilitate a crossing, survive after death, or does he not survive? And then he continues to exist. And would that give rise to one kind of misunderstanding? Well, to deny it, of course, would lead to many other misunderstandings. So it's a very subtle and careful question. And for this reason, Yama diverts his attention, refuses to give this answer as a gift. And in a way, it's a test for all of us. We can go through some of the other alternatives. So You can have whatever you want, says Yama. You can have companions, as many as you like. You can have chariots. You upgrade it to a modern context. You have as many cars as you like, as many planes as you like. You can put your brand on, whatever it is, Trump or whatever. You can have as many musical instruments, stereo sets, or whatever you like. You can own whole concert halls. And you can have as much land as you like. Whatever you want, you can have. Now, supposing you were to ask the average kind of person, all right, I have the capacity to give you whatever you like. Supposing you're some kind of rich person like Bill Gates or something, and he says, okay, I'm now, today is a special day. I've chosen you, and you can now have anything you like. Unlimited wealth is yours. I put you, instead of putting you in my will, I'm waiting for me to die, and so on and so forth. I'm going to grant you this favor now. I have more than enough for myself. Don't require it all. So what do you want? So, of course, the wise person will say, nothing. I want the answer to this question. And that begs another question to say, how many wise people are there? Because whatever you want, whatever you desire, for yourself, will come and will go. Nachiketa understands this. So he rejects all of this. Look at the wonderful thing. And that means that the first step in understanding the truths about existence and life begins with this deciphering. And that means that we always have a choice. So in this first chapter and the second section, there are two ways which are described. Anyat chiro, anyat uteya, prayaste ube, nanarte purusham, sinita. That is, see, the good and the good and the preferable and the pleasurable is exactly described in the Bhagavad Gita. These two paths are there available to you. We always have a choice of two alternatives. We'll go in this direction or that direction. The wonderful way in which some saints portray this as a conversation with the mind, like a kindly, wise uncle, you can say, or my mind, there's this option, there's that option. Which one would you like? Let me present them to you candidly. In this option, you can have as much food as you like. You can have as much visual entertainment as you like. You can be feted. People can praise you, and so that you can do. Or there is this path where you can drink the bliss. See, we've eliminated the negative thing of renunciation and said, here is the positive side. Do you want to immerse yourself in immortal bliss? Oh, my mind, do you want to drink this? Or you want to drink that? This one is pleasurable, but it'll last only a short while. And because it only lasts a short while, we want to repeat it because we feel that at some stage or other we'll be satisfied. Or we understand that the satisfaction comes in waves. So we are satisfied one moment and then it's gone. So we have to repeat the process. And it is the peaks that we count up. But it is those peaks of experience that has become your own subconscious understanding, your own mind, your own experience, your own learned behavior that has been carried forward. But we have to change it because it's not working. Ultimately, it's giving us pain. And the person who's able to decipher that makes a different decision. So different is the good and different indeed is the pleasant. And these two with different purposes bind a man. And of these two, it is well for him who takes hold of the good. But he who chooses the pleasant, he fails of his aim. And so it was a great test for Nachiketas, because Nachiketas said, no, that you keep this. I really want the answer to this question. And both of these, of course, the good and the pleasant, they both approach man, the Shreyas and the Prayas. Shreyas cha Prayas, cha manusyam itasto. They both approach. The wise man pondering over them discriminates. What is our first step, therefore, is we have to catch hold of the intellect, catch hold of that faculty, that discerning, discriminating faculty that we have, and make a decision. And the decision will come to us moment by moment. As the world presents itself, a decision has to be made. So this is a very important starting point. But the most important places where we can highlight some unusual aspects of this Upanishad will come as the whole story unfolds. So there is also an expression that is used, and curiously enough, we find it in the Christian Gospels also. The expression is in the 5th stanza, that abiding in the midst of ignorance, wise in their own esteem, not wise in actuality, wise in their own esteem, thinking themselves to be learned, particularly in the realm of religion, science and religion, but religion, really. People say, oh, I know. I am wise. Now, of course, that's an arrogant position. If I say I'm wise, it means all you are fools. So we can't say that. We can't even think that. Because the true wisdom really comes from something much more subtle, something deeper. Recognizing this, the wise in their own esteem, thinking themselves to be learned. Fools they are, actually. Treading a tortuous path, go about, and here's the phrase, like blind men led by one who is himself blind. The blind being led by the blind, and both fall into the ditch, of course. So the second point really is we have to find a teacher. There could be no better teacher that was selected by Nachiketa than Yama himself, who understood the secrets and keys to death, death being only one dimension of birth and life. And what is life? There's no biological answer, satisfactory answer. We can say that cellular life is really the fundamental life. But what animates it? What makes it so complex? What persuades it to stream what we call negative entropy on itself and make it self-sufficient and self-replicating and responding to the environment and still keeping within the second law of thermodynamics, because it's an isolated system. So it can stream negative entropy on itself. What does it? What makes it happen? Now, the key is there in our philosophy, because it says there is something internal to that which is allowing an animation. By its presence, it animates. And later we see some very, very key fundamental concepts. One concept in the Katha Upanishad is the picture of the eyes, the senses being pierced, like openings through the skin outward. See, all our impressions come from the skin. Even at the cellular level, the skin, the membrane, is the real sensitive area that catches the environment, responds to the environment, and also it rejects or assimilates what is useful to it, and then converts it into something internally, and then gives a return, again through the skin. See, this efferent and afferent current is there in the human. There is no sensory organ that is inside. All the sense organs are placed on the skin. The eyes are on the lips are on the outside. It's all on the outside because we have to interact with an environment. And so these are pierced outward. A very beautiful passage in this Katha Upanishad. And this is contained in the 2nd chapter there. One wise person decides to invert this whole process and look within. Now we're very good at rationalizing, investigating, trying to understand the external world. But then a more advanced area, more subtle area is the area of psychology, where we try to understand the behavioral aspect of the human person. And there we try to find out how a person thinks, what is behind their behavior, and how can it be changed? How can it be made better? How can we remove misery through therapy or other means? But first is to understand the psyche and then to deal with it. A much more subtle area. But more subtle than this, of course, is to understand what is that fundamental entity that operates the mental field and also the physical field and responds to it. Knowing that the physical is just a conceptualization of what is actually there. And so wise people will look internally and discover something. They will take the energy, that consciousness that is going through the senses and start inverting it. That is one important passage. Another one worth highlighting that we'll come to would be the idea of this 11-gated city. This is duplicated also in the Bhagavad Gita. It's put as a 9-gated city. The concept is there. Another shared concept of the Katha Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita would be that of the Ashwatha tree, that life is symbolized like a tree. Bhagavad Gita inverts it. There we find a beautiful example, duplicated in biology, understanding that the origin of life is something like a tree, something where all the branches are related to a single root, a single core. And the interesting thing about a tree's root is you can't see it. It's underneath. Supposing you had no understanding of what is a tree, you just see from the surface upwards. You have no idea that all its nourishment in life is being drawn from a source, a ground of being, a root. And this root we call Brahman, or in the individual we call it Atman, self. The first mention of self in relation to Nachiketa's question is there in the first chapter, second section, and the 7th stanza. And so it will go like this. He who cannot even be heard of by many, whom many even hearing do not know, wondrous is he who can teach him, and skillful is he who finds him, this thing. And wondrous is he who knows, even when instructed by the wise. We can see parallel passage, of course. Instructed by the wise is exactly this same statement made in the Bhagavad Gita. Nipunena acharanya anushtitaha saha. As in the Bhagavad Gita, that's a 7th chapter, 3rd stanza, we find that. See, Nachiketa is complimented by Yam as a seeker of final bliss. And in the first place infers that there is some hidden entity in the depths of your being called the self. This is the first direct, really, as direct as you can get in the first revelation. In answer to this doubt, is there something that exists? Is there something that doesn't exist? I know something exists, but is it complete self-annihilation? Is it non-existence in the normal sense? No. Well, then what is it? Well, it cannot even be heard by many. And many hearing, they don't know. That's how subtle it is. And then, who can teach this? Na narena varina prokta isha suvitnyayo bahuta chintya manha. Taught by an inferior man, inferior person, he cannot be truly understood. And he is thought of in many ways, unless taught by one who knows him as himself. There is no going thither, for it is inconceivable. Being subtler than the subtle, that's the difficulty. Can you give me evidence of God? No, you won't find it outside. Because it's subtle. Do we have any examples of subtle? Yes, electricity is very subtle. You know its manifestation, but you never touched it directly, you never smelt it, you never tasted it, you didn't put your tongue out and lick it, nothing happened. Is there anything else subtle? Yes. We are told that in the whole area of space, most of the whole universe is so-called empty space, a void. There's not much in it. The density of the universe is very, very little. It's very, very dilute. Hardly anything. Vast, 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 vast areas of infinite nothingness. And yet we are told, no. Inside that, we find what is termed quantum void, a kind of bubbling potentiality with things are there, continuously active below the surface, unseen, so subtle, we don't know anything. It wasn't so long ago, maybe 400 or 500 years ago, that Leeuwenhoek caught hold of a small scraping from his teeth, and he put it under a newly developed microscope, and for the first time saw these moving cells. Whole populations are there on your teeth, on your skin, everywhere. And he got a shock because he prided himself on his hygienic maintenance of his teeth. But we all have it, you see. Vast populations of unseen things, subtle, until they are revealed by certain insights. In this case, certain magnification insights. Now, if that is so, in terms of our so-called normal life, if the unseen is there, but we're not aware of it, only in textbooks, or if we look under the microscope, then we might be aware of it. Then how much more so the area of the mind? Can you take an idea and put it in a jar? Somebody had a dream last night, that's fine. You can tell me your dream, doing a dream interpretation. What evidence is there for your dream? Only the dreamer knows. I can't prove that you did dream or did not dream. In fact, the logical positivism, which is a school of philosophy, made a decision. I won't accept anything that I cannot directly perceive. So the professor, who was very keen on this philosophy, he told the class this, and then he had to say, I have no idea whether you're thinking at all. I have no idea at all, because that's your own experience. And my experience is that I can see you sitting there. But I have no idea whether you're thinking. I have no idea whether there's such a thing as feeling. So we leave it aside. So this subtlety is really the whole subject of these Upanishads. And because it is subtle, then specific teachers have to be employed, highlighted, sought out. This idea of a guru is not specifically Eastern, because all the great saints, whether Eastern or Western, always had some kind of guru, be it under the label of a spiritual director or under the label of confessor or some such language. Jesus himself had the mentor of John the Baptist. Ramakrishna himself had all the great teachers of different schools and paths. Everybody requires a teacher. So the great Shankaracharya follows his teacher and his teacher's teacher also. So in selecting a teacher, that's the second lesson we find from the Katha Upanishad. But the other thing, so let us summarize. What did we learn so far from the Katha Upanishad? Well, we start off with discernment, with discrimination, understanding what is Shreyas, what is prayas, and making a distinction. What path should we follow? Making a choice. But before that, we forgot something. Nachiketa's resolve. Of course, we couched in the language of Shraddha, faith, but what we really mean is resolve. There has to be a resolve there, just as any endeavor requires resolve. If I want to climb Mount Everest, I can't just do it with a sauntering attitude. There has to be some kind of resolve there. And that resolve often has to be renewed on a daily basis, because this world is so enchanting, it's so captivating. I need 1,000 tools. And because the reality is so subtle, I need 1,000 more. So these Upanishads are great tools. if you're being introduced to the Upanishads for the first time, of course, the Upanishads are themselves called Vedanta. Vedanta, that essence of truth. When I first held a class in our new premises, one Hindu gentleman asked me, "What is this Vedanta?" I was shocked. I thought every Hindu understood that the basis of Hinduism is this Vedanta philosophy. And what does it mean, this Vedanta? Understanding, of course, Hinduism to be a relatively new term, a geographic term that is applied to certain religious practices. But it's not just Hinduism as a cultural practice that has its basis of this Vedanta. It is all religions and all, forget about religions, but all serious pursuits about the essence or the foundation of truth. That truth above truths, that position of truth that never changes, that is infinite. So these Upanishads are taught, derived from the idea sitting near to a teacher. So we have this resolve, and then we have this discernment and a resolve to do this and to find out what is the truth, relentlessly searching for it. And then the first step of this understanding that we have free choice. And the first step, of course, is due to our ignorance. And then finding a teacher. So this is what we have learned so far in this Katha Upanishad. Another thing that we understood was, of course, that this vision has to be inverted if we are to be successful. And the Katha Upanishad points out that meditation in the 12th stanza, the first chapter, second section, 12th stanza, that meditation brings us to the core of the self. And then it is also mentioned that for meditation purposes, we can visualize this as being the size of a thumb. Now I want to see if we can highlight the most critical sections, the sections which have really a wonderful impact, a unique impact, and presented only as the Katha Upanishad would present it. The question of grace arises. We find this in the, again, in the 23rd stanza, again, the first chapter, second section, because this idea of theistic grace is mentioned. You know, our effort is very little compared to a divine movement toward us. This self, says this Upanishad, says Yam, Dayam Atma Pravachanina Labhyo Na Medhaya Na Bahuna Shrutena. This self cannot be attained by instruction. We mentioned a teacher, but you can't attain this by mere instruction. The instruction just shows you the way, but you have to practice. Nor by intellectual power. Some people think that philosophy is enough, understanding the principles is enough, making statements is enough. Everybody talks about God, but who knows God? Who knows God directly? Not even through much hearing. And you'll notice also I change terms, because this eternal self that is in you, just presented as an existent entity, we now can use alternative terms. Because when we talk of grace, we're now talking of something more theistic, something personal. Nor through much hearing. That's where I left off, Shrutinaha. But he is to be attained only by the one whom the self chooses. To such a one, the self reveals his own nature. Now we have a theological concept almost of grace. Actually, we think we have a choice in it. No. It's God's grace. Grace that will have to come to us. When we step one step forward, That grace has to move 1,000 steps, and it does, toward us. And Ramakrishna's wonderful example, the wind of God's grace is continuously blowing. We have but to set our sail. We can put a sail up and we can huff and puff. We run out of breath and then the boat won't move. But when we raise the sail up, when we expand this canvas, before we even get the ship in the water, or the boat in the water, the wind wants to take us. It is the wind that's doing the lion's share, not us. So some fundamental openings have to be there. We have to be in a position where our hands are open and be receptive. That requires tremendous humility, because it says, I am not the one that makes things happen. I am only opening the way for it. So let me make this preparation. Let me make this resolve and discernment. And let me be sincere in this. And let me open my way. And then it's a let go attitude, because that grace will carry me. The choice is not mine. So how do I attain this, as it were? It is only by one whom the self chooses. And to such a one, the self reveals his own nature. Meditation won't do it. Karma yoga won't do it. Doing good works won't do it. Being compassionate won't do it. These are all just preparing a way, an opening. What does it is, by its own nature, it gets revealed. So while the Supreme Self is difficult to know and is unknowable by unaided intellect, he is knowable through his own self-revelation to that person whom he chooses. And this view, of course, will look upon the Supreme Self in this context as a personal God, and of course teaches this doctrine of divine grace. This is a very important concept to be found here in this Katha Upanishad. Then another important concept, apart from that, no slain and so on and so forth, but a very famous statement comes, which Swami Vivekananda is fond of using, because it gives us great, great strength. It's an exhortation to arise and awake. Swami Vivekananda puts a very loose kind of summary version of it. Arise and wake. Stop not until that goal is reached. Yeah, we find this in the first chapter again, the third section, and we find it in number 14th stanza. Utishtata jagrata prapyavaran nibodhata. Arise awake, having attained all these gifts, all these graces, understand them. But then there's an exhortation. Shurasya dhara nishita dharatyaya durgam patastat kava vadanti. Sharp as the edge of a razor and hard to cross, difficult to tread, is that path. Now, having said arise and awake, develop your enthusiasm, take all your energies and dedicate them. The way of religion, as we might call it, is never easy. And we should simply accept that. We should accept that progress is not linear. Progress will be up and down, but as long as the general trend is up, that's okay. We shouldn't be disappointed on the down, but we should be alert and keen, because it is the attention that always needs to be sharp as a razor. We have to be sharp and keen. The road of Jnana Yoga requires keenness and sharpness of intellect, and others may want to choose a different path, no doubt. So we strive to enter in at the straight gate, says Jesus, for the narrow is the gate, and straighten the way that leads to life, and few be they that find it. This is not to discourage you, it is just to forewarn you. If you want to climb Everest, don't think thousands of people have gone before and have a National Geographic view of it, thinking, oh, the top is so pretty and all of that. No, when you get there, you're liable for frostbite. You can fall off the mountain. You can be taken over by a sudden storm. You have to be thoroughly prepared. But imagine now, there are people who have an adventurous, sporting attitude, who immediately take up this challenge and go to the Mount Everest. So we have learned a level of excitement when we want to discover the heights of the mountains and the depths of the sea. But who will find the depths of his own psyche, and who will find the depths of his own being, that is called this internal self? So that is a worthwhile pursuit also. It is in fact the most worthwhile pursuit, because having gotten that, I've gotten everything. The self is not to be sought through the senses. The self caused pierced the openings of the senses outward. Therefore one looks outward, not within oneself. But some wise people, however, some wise man, however, seeking the eternal, with his eyes turned inward, saw the self. This self-caused, there's a Neoplatonistic aspect of this. That which causes itself or produces itself is different from that which is unproduced. So if you take, for example, the theistic view of a creator God, and not what this is saying, the uncaused Brahman, then there's something of a difficulty. The small-minded go after pleasures. They walk into the snare of widespread death. The wise, however, recognizing life eternal, do not seek the stable among things which are unstable here. That's the next stanza. Then this important concept that I mentioned, and we come to a section where all stanzas end in tadvaitat. This is that. So what are we saying? Now it goes through various aspects, starting off with the very, very important understanding that the individual soul is one with the universal. Imagine if we understood that. Imagine if we understood that there's one totality. Then fear goes away to start with. Competition goes away. Desire goes away. Everything goes away by itself. And so it's a very fundamental concept to have. We can have it about the world at large. You say there's only one fundamental matter. And everything else is a manifested variation of it. We can say that there is, as the yogis say, there is one energy that has a vortex here and a vortex there. What we call the sun, the moon, the body, the table, this and that, are simply caught up vortexes of energy. Given an identity, of course, and operating as almost as individuals, like individual cells. Every individual cell of your body has an independent life. It is called a cell because it was first noticed as a kind of square. But the whole cooperative movement that we call the body is not like that, and we don't think of it like that. So when you look at a totality, you're looking at the total as being greater than the sum of its parts. When we look at the parts, we have a difficulty. So an important passage goes on like this. And the theme is the individual soul as one with the universal soul. This oneness has to be caught. So we're going through some description. There is a witness. There is a witness to the past, present, and the future. This witnessing position is also an enjoyer. Imagine if you're a witness to a play or a drama. Are you not also the enjoyer? So this ultimate self is a witness and an enjoyer. Then going up a notch, we can say, see, all of this that we see in the external world is all material and made from subtle elements. but it comes from one single entity. And that single entity, that is a personal God. We can call this Hiranyagarbha and Tadvaitat. This is that. So the witness and enjoyer is that. The cosmic mind is that. That is the personal God, is that. And the elements is that. And the impersonal God also, that is here described as Aditi, the mother of all the other deities, is that. This is presenting a whole totality. And all of this, of course, is suitable material for meditation. Then it goes on to what is the cause of rebirth. It's the non-recognition of this unity is the cause of this rebirth, because it means we have desires. And the eternal Lord abides within. And then a beautiful example is given as the Katha Upanishad. We can see rainwater, and we chase the rainwater to find out what's its destination, what's its substance, not knowing that water is water. And when we understand this unity of existence, that it is water only, it doesn't matter if the water is founded in Canada in Lake Erie and comes over Niagara Falls, and we think that it is different, and then it goes on from there, we think that that's different, and we want to analyze what are the differences, and we categorize them as completely different things. No, the water that was there in Lake Erie is water as it goes over the falls, is water as it goes after, because when we look at it, when we taste it, when we analyze it, we find 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It's water. So a beautiful, beautiful description is put in here in this Katha Upanishad. This is just to give you a flavor of the uniqueness of this Upanishad. We mentioned the whole aspect of an 11-gated city, belonging to one that is unborn, whose consciousness is unflickering. And many times I have given this description. This body itself, we can consider something like an 11-gated city. So 2 similes are given. One is the analogy of a chariot. The body is like a chariot. And because of that, we can control it. So it gives us the lesson how to control it. We start by controlling the intellect. The intellect controls the mind controls the senses. That's the order of business. And then now we have, wait, no control is necessary. There's another dimension to this. Supposing we revalue this body as an 11-gated city, with that entity seated within, because of its presence, everything operates. All the offices start doing their job and their business. Everything starts operating in a smooth way. Food gets digested, blood circulates, heart pumps, and so on. So this is a very unique concept that we find here. We find it echoed in the Bhagavad Gita, described as nine-gated city. And then another important aspect then to this is that this self that we're talking about is both immanent and transcendent. And then a most important passage. I often quote this indirectly, and I want to substantiate what I say with this passage. It tells us, and here we're looking at 2:2 and 13. Nityo nityanam chetanas chetanam eko bahunam yo vidad vahati kaman. The one eternal amid the transient, the conscious amid the conscious, the one amid many who grants their desires. To the wise who perceive him as abiding in the soul, to them is eternal peace, and to no others. That one is the eternal thinker, is the eternal thinker within all the thinkings, and therefore grants the desires of many. If the thinker is only one, then that thought is infallible and manifests itself, and that is why steering it in a chosen direction and keeping it sustained will yield all the fruits of it in the world around. And then a most important concept here. You see, when we look at the sun and the moon and all of these entities, it looks as if they locally, independently, are self-effulgent. The sun is, of course, the king of our solar system. But the sun shines not there. That is where the self is, because now that self is not just internal here, it is also internal everywhere. Shines not there, nor the moon and the stars. These lightnings shine not. Where then could this fire be? Everything shines. Only after that shining light, his shining illumines all this world. He's shining, all things shine. Tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati tamevam pantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati. He's shining, all these things shine. They're a wonderful, wonderful concept. We take it for granted that the sun shines. We take it for granted that the moon gets reflected. We take it for granted that the electricity, you switch a switch on, and the contact with the electricity and the adapter called the light bulb manifests light. We take it for granted when we strike a match and light a fire, that something is there automatically. We do it carelessly. We don't have any mindfulness about it. We take it for granted that when we look into the night sky, we can see shining objects, be they reflections on planets, or be they stars millions and billions of light years away. All this we take for granted. But these only shine because that self-effulgent one is shining, making them shine, lighting the lamps, if you like, if you want to put it in a poetic way. And all of these, like angels, making our crooked paths straight for us, if you want a poet's mind on it. So these are some of the important concepts in the Katha Upanishad. I mentioned the world tree as analogous to Brahman and the world, and I've mentioned some of the salient ideas between that and the Bhagavad Gita. And we have a definition also contained in this Katha Upanishad that yoga really is sense control. That is principally yoga, and that the self is existent, not having a quality or any of these things. All of this is contained in this important Katha Upanishad. Now, what I might do then, having given you a nice overview of this, we might approach it then in more detail in the subsequent weeks and see how it fits into some practical themes. Themes meaning everybody is concerned with happiness. I gave a lecture in London on happiness. And it was all around one important stanza that I haven't even mentioned in answer to a question, what is the value of all this? And how can this be known? And then the reply is to do with the dissimilarity between the self and the senses and their rising and their setting. And there's a wonderful philosophical discussion, because at the end of it, it says, if you know this dissimilarity, then all grieving stops. And don't forget, both the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, every scripture like this is telling the same thing. We want to help you get rid of your pessimism, of your suffering. We want to get rid of your grief. We are grieving. Principal grieving is to do with death. And this dialogue is a dialogue with death. That is why it is so poignant, and that is why it's so relevant, because it goes right to the heart of our fear. That is the fear of death. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.